Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Time for us to begin. It's clear to me that many of us haven't seen each other for a while. It's nice to gather. Welcome to the University of Minnesota, and welcome to this celebration of life of David R. Johnson. I am Michael Rodriguez, Dean of the College of Education and Human Development. I met David shortly after I started as a faculty member as an assistant professor of educational measurement and evaluation in 1999. And David quickly introduced himself to me, as he often did with new faculty, hoping to introduce me to staff at ICI, seeking to engage in rigorous measurement and evaluation practices in projects throughout the Institute. And since then, I've had the honor of working on multiple projects with ICI staff, and I've always been impressed with their commitment to the translation of high-quality research to inform practice and policy. And this is clearly an influence of David R. Johnson. Now, knowing who's coming to give some remarks, I'm going to keep mine very brief. Right? Thank you. Thank you, Susan. I have just a couple of reminders as we proceed through our brief program this afternoon. This event is being recorded, so be sure to show your best side throughout. If you are attending on Zoom, please sign the electronic guest book. You will find the link in the chat feature. For in-person guests, you can sign the guest book at the registration table or use the QR code on the program to sign into the electronic guest book. We want everyone who's present today to be acknowledged, and we appreciate your presence. This afternoon, we are in the presence of some of David's family, friends, and colleagues. Upon the conclusion of our program, please take the time to introduce yourself to others. We have a lot to share, and we are in good company today. Now, I have the distinct pleasure to introduce Professor and President Emeritus and founder of the Institute on Community Integration, my pal, Bob Brunix.
Good afternoon, everyone. Michael wasn't referring to me when he was hoping the speakers would be brief. It reminds me of that cartoon of Garfield the cat, and Garfield says, "I resemble that." But anyway, good afternoon, and thank you for attending this celebration of David's life. This is a difficult time of loss for David's family. Sharon, Andrew, and Travis, their partners and their grandchildren, and for his many friends and colleagues and current and former students. I had the great privilege of calling him my close personal friend and colleague for 40 years. The early years involved the creation and building of the Institute on Community Integration, as Dean Rodriguez mentioned, an inspiring endeavor that engaged many of the people who are here with us this afternoon. In our journey, David and I managed to schedule some time to start the Canadian fishing season for about 20 years. The last 10 years were especially memorable, starting at our Northwoods cabin, north of Grand Marais, and complete with David arriving with a whole trunk full of food that was prepared by Sharon, but she had very little faith in our fishing ability, as I recall. And Susan looked forward to Sharon's magnificent cooking as well, more than the results of our fishing, I might add. Amy asked me to reflect on the early years of David's career. In the early days of ICI, we were determined to establish a vibrant center and join a national network that is now called the Centers of Excellence in Developmental Disabilities. We had a strong community-centered focus in ICI, And we wanted to undertake programs in supported employment and school-to-work transition supports and services. We wanted those programs to be in the community. Dick Weatherman, a friend and colleague, suggested that I interview David for a 50% time appointment in this area. We didn't have much money back then, unlike the ICI today. Amy gets the last word. At that time, in 1984 and 85, David was a full-time tenure-track faculty member at St. Cloud State University, likely with a secure 12-month salary. Anyway, I was very impressed with David's experience and particularly his commitment to really make a difference and to really embrace the values and the work of ICI, the mission of ICI. So I told him we could be really very flexible. We could make a full-time appointment position so we wouldn't lose any money for 6 months, with the understanding that the full-time position would materialize after 6 months if we were successful in raising outside grants and contracts to pay his salary. Sound familiar to the people in ICI? I think it does. To my utter amazement, and most likely Sharon's as well, they were both starting careers in a new family. David accepted the position, and he accepted a big risk. We succeeded in securing the needed grants, and David never looked back. I tell this story to share an important truth about David, a truth, if you will. His was a life lived with a commitment to deep values and a great sense of purpose. While he achieved numerous titles and recognitions, the opportunity to make a difference and serve others was the primary driving purpose of David's life. His values and commitments were shaped early in life as the younger sibling and legal guardian of his brother Lance, who had intellectual and developmental disabilities. Fresh out of his undergraduate studies in sociology, David signed up for the Peace Corps in Jamaica in the West Indies, and he coordinated it in that particular position and assignment, special education and vocational rehabilitation programs with the International Labor Organization and the UN Task Force on Rehabilitation Services. These were early life experiences, and these early life experiences created the foundation for David's lifetime of extraordinary commitment and enduring contributions. David's drive to connect values to action naturally led him to a career as an impactful leader. Next year, ICI will celebrate its 40th anniversary, a truly remarkable achievement. David led ICI for 20 years, more than half of its existence. During this period, ICI's growth, recognition, and impact was truly stunning. Several years ago, the university decided to assess the value and productivity of centers. It's something we do about every 2 years at the University of Minnesota. The results were quite predictable. The study found that 60% of the centers were highly productive. 20% were in the process of closure, and 20% were under review. The Star Tribune carried a story, and to my delight, cited ICI as a university exemplar for achieving the very highest levels of productivity and impact. This was a study of 200 organizations, 200 centers and institutes in the University of Minnesota. And when they took a look at it, they decided that ICI was the gold standard. David's leadership shaped that unique distinction. He led by example by forming and directing several national centers. He served as president of the National Association of University Centers on Disabilities, the group we joined way back in the mid-1980s. And he helped to increase federal core support for centers of excellence nationwide by close to threefold with his colleagues during his tenure as president of the board. In his spare time, you'll hear more about this from others. He served for 8 years as a Senior Associate Dean for Research and Policy in the College of Education and Human Development, leading significant growth in the college's external funding and transfer of its discoveries to practice and policy. For this leadership and so many other accomplishments, David was awarded the college's Emma Birkmeyer Professorship of Educational Leadership. David's profile of leadership was matched by his passion for service. His list of contributions includes many leading national and international organizations, service on numerous state and local organizations, including serving as chair of the school board where his children attended, and membership on literally dozens of college and university committees and task forces, including the All-University Committee on Research. This is an incredible profile of university service, and it was recognized by the President's Award for Outstanding Service, a very, very rare recognition. I must pause for a moment and say one other member has received this recognition who spent his career at ICI, and that's Charlie Lakin. In the words of Robert Greenleaf, David was an incredible, unselfish servant leader, a leader who led by example, and through his example encouraged so many others in ICI and beyond to serve the needs of our communities. Greenleaf also states that the power of mentorship is habitually practiced by servant leaders. After David announced his illness, I received a note of concern from Dr. Katie Pickell, who's with us today, and she's a dear friend. She mentioned, and I didn't even know of her association today with David. He said that she mentioned that David was a wonderful mentor in all things for her. I did not understand the research rules of the university, and what happened is Katie very proudly brought a grant to David's desk that she had secured from a local foundation, a significant grant. And David's first question was, have you put in any indirect cost or overhead? And she was a brand new appointee, as she told me, and she was in utter shock. She didn't know what to do. And David just quietly and sensitively guided her through that process. And if I know David, if there was a $10,000 gap in the budget, he found a way to make it up. I shared Katie's comment with David at his bedside, and quite characteristically, he was quite profoundly moved and very surprised, which says a lot about him. Many of David's most lasting contributions were made through his scholarship. He was one of this university's most productive scholars in securing external funding to advance research, education, public policy, and community service. He published extensively through books, monographs, professional journals, presentations, not just in the United States, but around the world. He led in making ICI and the university an international center of innovation and scholarship in supported employment and preparation and support for work and community living for people with disabilities. David lived a life of great purpose and a life of great contribution. In the center of his life was his deep devotion to his family, Sharon, Andrew, and Travis, and later their partners and grandchildren. He was deeply committed to a life of creative leadership, benefiting people with disabilities and their families, benefiting his college and the University of Minnesota, and including so many friends and students and colleagues in the journey. Eleanor Roosevelt once remarked that true friends leave footprints on your heart. David left enduring footprints on the hearts of his families, on the hearts of his family, on the hearts of his students and colleagues, on the heart of this great college and this great university, and on mine. His legacy lives in us, and we will miss him.
Now our colleague Ken Bartlett.
Good afternoon. I first worked with David in his role as Associate Dean when I was serving as chair of the Department of Work and Human Resource Education. David, then as a key member of the CEHD Dean's Office, helped guide the merger and integration of academic programs of that department into the one in which he held his tenure, the Department of Educational Policy and Administration. The resulting 2-into-1 academic unit was and remains the Department of Organizational Leadership, Policy and Development, or, to use U of M acronym speak, OLPD. I completed a 7-year stint in 2 roles as an Associate Dean for the college, serving half of that time with David, before I followed him back to a faculty role in OLPD and served as chair of that department from 2019 through June of 2023. It is David's years of multiple impactful contributions to OLPD that I will focus my comments on this afternoon. Quite simply, David's passing ends an era in the Department of OLPD, as well as the history of the 2 prior separate departments. The faculty and staff of OLPD, our degree programs, students, and the many other people served were significantly and positively impacted by David. He will be very much missed by the thousands of people he influenced. During his time in OLPD, David served for many years as coordinator of our Evaluation Studies program, one of 5 academic degree areas that compose the department. The coordinator role is a demanding mix of tasks taken on by faculty in addition to their teaching, research, and service. The role includes a key strategic component in working with the department chair and other program coordinators on the leadership team. Yet, the role is also very tactical, or I could perhaps best describe this work with the term firefighting, dealing with urgent issues that seem to arise often daily. Both roles are vital, and never more so than the early days of the pandemic and our shift to online learning. David had the ability to effortlessly move between the immediate tactical and the more long-range strategic roles. He did this by dedicating himself fully and tirelessly to focus and successfully complete the next most pressing task in front of him. That he did this while teaching, supervising internship placements, advising a very large cohort of doctoral students, and maintaining engagement with research, to name but a few of his many contributions, was remarkable. And never once did David complain about the work of being program coordinator. In fact, during my years of serving as chair, I lost count of the number of times David would inquire, "And how else can I help you and the department?" One amusing example of David seeking new ways to be of service always occurred during the annual review meeting. These one-on-one meetings to review faculty performance over the previous 12 months and plan goals for the upcoming year are also used for input into salary merit increases. And let's just say that these conversations can be anxiety-producing, awkward, and much longer in duration than planned. And that's just the department chair's perspective, not the faculty. If ever there was a faculty member with an annual review of accomplishments year after year to be proud of and highlight during these meetings, it was David. Yet, on the scheduled day and time, David would walk into my office, sit down, and then he would say to me, with not a very good impression of a New Zealand accent. Well, David, pretty good year for grants and publications. Your teaching and advising is solid, and you made contributions to service. Blah, blah, blah. Glad we got that out of the way. Ken, now let's talk about something else, and how can I be of service to the department? David was a scholar and a gentleman of the old school, who maintained his career, his professionalism, his sense of humour, his support for others, and his kindness to the end. He left more than an incredible research, teaching, and service legacy in OLPD and far beyond. I don't think he ever quite grasped the extent to which he was a role model and mentor, and not just for our students. For example, as a traditionalist myself, in terms of wearing a jacket and tie to work, I could always count on David being similarly attired. With over a dozen years of working with David in leadership roles, often during long back-to-back meeting-filled days, you could always count on his necktie being perfectly positioned, top shirt button done up, and jacket still on at the end of the day, just as he looked when he arrived on campus, often in the pre-dawn hours. I think that says a lot about how he carried himself. There is one final and lasting impression that I wish to share. David was in the habit of stopping by my office, unannounced, right at the very end of the afternoon. We would chat for a few minutes to review the day, and then sometimes mid-sentence, he would rise and say he was headed home. My reply to him of, well, lucky for you, but I've still got a pile of email that needs to be responded to, a report, probably now overdue to the dean, as well as a request for data to be sent to central administration before I can leave. David would say back to me that I've already put in a full day of work, and in fact, that work will be there in the morning, with no doubt more added to it overnight, and it was time to head home. He was right. I needed many, many reminders of what David knew to be true. Our work is important. Our efforts and contributions to this great university, one David loved deeply and was so grateful for the career and opportunities it afforded him, are also important. But nothing at work is as important as our home and our families. And I think this is the greatest gift from David, and one that I, and I hope we all will, long remember. Thank you.
Now, please welcome longtime collegiate leader Ryan Warren.
Good afternoon. So I arrived in Minnesota from New York City in 2006. And shortly thereafter, began working with David when he became the Associate Dean for Research and Policy in the college. And I learned pretty quickly that the R in David R. Johnson stands for research. So I don't know who printed Richard in the bulletin, but you're never going to convince me that it's Richard. To no surprise to anyone that knew David, he took on this role while remaining as the director of ICI and continuing his own research portfolio. So he had about a 200% effort position when he came into the dean's office. And I remember one of his favorite lines was, "Follow the money." And he did it better than anybody I know. My early years were a bit challenging, to say the least. It was following the Wave 1 initiative, in which multiple colleges came together under CEHD, and there were a multitude of issues that we had to deal with. Cultural issues, structural issues, and very deeply a multi-million-dollar financial issue. You remember that one, Bob? Well, so do I, obviously. And I was largely tasked with the latter, the financial issues. And, you know, I had to explain to department chairs, to college leaders, to university leaders that we have plans to address it and assure them that we had it under control. Minimally, David was a thought partner in this work. I'd sit in his office, pick his brain about our proposed solutions, and on more than one occasion, he was more than a thought partner. He would stand with me, providing his perspective to college leaders and doing so with an air of authority that I knew was much greater than mine. He was trusted. And he was always willing to stand behind me, to stand beside me, or to stand in front of me, depending on what the situation called for. When I would thank him for his help, he would say something along the lines of, "It's just part of doing the work." And I think in his mind, he was saying, "This dummy from New York is going to get run out of town if I don't help him." He never said that, but I'm pretty sure he thought that more than once. But he always said, "It's just doing the work." It wasn't his job, but it was work that he knew needed to be done. He knew he could help, and he just did it. Day in and day out, he just did the work. And in those early years, as we were climbing out of this financial hole, he's also building up a collegiate infrastructure to increase the sponsored funding portfolio across the college. It's a complicated college with many different funding agencies, and David methodically built upon the collegiate infrastructure that his predecessor, Francis Lorenz, began to support researchers across the college. He launched a monthly coffee break for grant series to help new faculty, as David would say, get in the game. And he launched a policy breakfast series, which is still active in the college. The way he worked with the grant coordinators, the hires he made, the structures that he put in place, the training and support he provided all helped to grow the sponsored research portfolio. In David's first year in the role, the college generated about $28 million in sponsored research, which was pretty consistent the years prior. His final year, just 7 years later, the college generated $49 million. So a substantial increase in those 7 years under David's watch. And then the next year, we're at $51 million. I won't ask Frank where we're at now, but it's not at $51 million. David had a profound impact on the college. And while his work impacted many across the college, he also had a profound impact personally and individually on his close friends and colleagues. He and I had many broad-ranging conversations. I remember one in which we were discussing return on investments. And at one point, he proudly told me that ICI gets $150,000 in state support and generates $12 million in sponsored funding. Well, I'm a pretty quick study. And I said, "David, that's fantastic. How about next year I give you $300,000 in state support and you bring in $24 million? David gave me that kind of classic look. His tongue was in the lower lip and shaking his head. Shockingly, there was no response. And some of my proudest moments were when I knew I had a good line and David didn't have a retort, because he often did. And he often presented, intentionally or not, as a bit gruff and intimidating to many folks, at least before you got to know him. It was pretty clear he wasn't a warm, fuzzy icebreaker kind of guy. And early on at a retreat, I jokingly said in this fairly large meeting that we should do David's favorite icebreaker. And I did my best imitation of that, which is, "All right, what's your favorite color and who cares? I'll go first." "Blue. Nobody. Next." He always appreciated that. But again, at that time, he got, the tongue was in the lower lip and shaking his head. But this time he had a retort. And he said, "Actually, Ryan, my favorite icebreaker are trust falls. Catch me, David." Fine. And, it's funny. As a joke, it's funny. And David had a great humor, but it's really funny because of the irony. David caught many people. He caught faculty who needed help to get in the game. He caught students when an advisor would abruptly leave and somebody had to fill in. He caught me multiple times. And I'm guessing around this room, you all can say the same. He didn't let people fail. He was there when you needed it, and when you didn't know that you needed it, he was there. And as I've gotten older and my reflections of the meaningful people that have gone before me, I try to identify just one thing that I can take with me. To truly honor the legacy of those that I've loved and respected, I need to apply a lesson learned from them to my life, to how I do things. It lives on in us, and I had a grandfather who took great pleasure in simple things, another who hummed when he was stressed. I may start humming now. A grandmother who made the best milkshakes, another who had the best reading voice. And they're lessons about priorities, about how you go about your day, the positive impact you can have on others, but how you live your life. And David, his lesson is for me to catch people. Help when you can help. Don't let them struggle. Don't let them fail. Do the work, even if it isn't your job. Do the work. It's a great lesson. And I'm going to close with my favorite memory, which wasn't at work. It was traveling to the farm with my family to visit David and Sharon and to meet the horses, as our daughter at the time was smitten with horses. By story and imagination only, she was about 3, had never been with a horse, and David and Sharon had us out, and I have a picture of David holding Elsa as she sat on Red, and the grin on Elsa I'd never seen before. It was like ear to ear, but chin to forehead, just like her whole face was just like absolutely lit up. And I actually think that that's David's long game retort to our conversation about return on investments. Because if you know anything about horses, the money goes one direction. You're just spending money, spending money. And I think David knew that, and he's proud that Elsa is still into horses, and it has a lot to do with him. I'm profoundly grateful for having worked with him for so long, and in his honor, I will do my best to catch people.
ICI Director Amy Hewitt.
Thank you all so much for being here. It feels a little bit like a ICI reunion or a family reunion, so thank you for being here. I had the privilege and honor of working with David for 35 years. I sort of take a deep breath when I think about that, because when I came to ICI, I thought I'd be there for 3 years, and here I am all these years later. But I was asked to really focus on David's contributions to ICI and to the field of intellectual and developmental disabilities. And in doing so, as David would have wanted me to do or taught me to do, I did a little research, and I used mixed methods to come up with my remarks, so he would be very proud. But I reached out to a lot of people for their input. Not just people here, but David had colleagues all over the world. And literally you ask and they responded with what their memories were of David and his contributions. So I turned to the data, I gathered personal stories, and in keeping with what he would ask me to do, I'm going to try to keep it simple and not overcomplicate my remarks. But I have to say, everybody thought Bob was going to go over the time limit we were given, and I guarantee it's going to be me, so I apologize in advance for that. But David's accomplishments related to quality of life for people with disabilities and their families is really distinguished. He had a lifetime of leadership, service, scholarship, and as you heard from others who talked today, he was a professor and a mentor to so many people. His impact on the interests of people with disabilities is really clear. For over 40 years, he devoted his career to improving education, transition services for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities through research, demonstration, teaching, and education, and without question made significant contributions to the creation and dissemination of new knowledge that made an impact at the local, state, national, and international levels. His resume really should be written in chapters, but has a simple theme: equality, access, and opportunity for all persons with disabilities. His work focused on several areas, including but not limited to vocational rehabilitation, special education, and transition to community life. Like so many people who work at ICI, his interest and lifelong commitment to improving education for people with disabilities was greatly influenced by his family. His brother Vance was born with an intellectual disability, and his parents were early leaders in the Minnesota ARC movement and in the early years of developing special education policy in Minnesota. Throughout his career, he used education, research, policy, and advocacy as tools to drive his passion and to create opportunities for inclusive education and inclusive life for people with disabilities. Shortly after David's coming to ICI in 1986, his PhD dissertation on public policy in supporting the transition to adulthood for youth with disabilities contributed to some really important reports in this state with the Minnesota Legislature, the Department of Education, and the Board of Vocational and Technical Education. And he became a quick policy thought leader in this state around those topics and really helped Minnesota as they redesigned access to special education and transition in our state. David worked also to conduct some of the very earliest studies on the cost effectiveness of supported employment for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Much of his subsequent academic and leadership activities really followed and refined from those very early reports that were written and his early research. His resulting expertise was reflected in a lot of his consultative and collegial engagements, including with the United States Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, and many state legislative bodies. Over the years, David was a principal investigator on the National Center for Secondary Education and Transition. A lot of the employees that worked on that center are here today, so it's a good testimony to the importance of that work. But he also was frequently help to federal agencies and their staff, including NIDLR directors, assistant secretaries, deputy assistant secretaries, directors of special education programs, and so many others. They all frequently turned to David for knowledge and opinion on policy matters related to school transition, employment, and supplemental security income, as well as work incentives. It is an understatement, really, to say that David had a prolific career and one that mattered. He was awarded over 100 competitive grants. Between 1993 and the time of his death, David had brought in nearly $43 million in sponsored projects to the University of Minnesota and to ICI. Through his work, many useful resources were developed that continue to be used by professionals today. Examples include Get Set and Youthhood, which Youthhood is a really old website and still gets the most hits of any website at ICI, I believe. Perhaps one of his most significant contributions to the disability field was his contributions to the development, implementation, refinement of a dropout prevention program called Check and Connect. This program has a strong evidence base in preventing dropout of youth with disabilities and children without disabilities. The What Works Clearinghouse of the U.S. Department of Education identifies Check and Connect as an intervention to show positive results in the category of staying in school. Since 2009, Check and Connect training has been delivered in all 50 states and 5 international locations. David took Check and Connect research findings and turn it not only into a replicable intervention model, but also an entrepreneurial revenue stream for ICI. He published over 50 peer-reviewed journal articles. He served on many editorial boards of many peer-reviewed journals and held many leadership roles. Bob mentioned his role at AUCD, but he was also involved in leadership roles in Exceptional Children, National Association of Vocational Special Needs Personnel, and the Minnesota Governor's Council on Developmental Disabilities. One of his most important roles was serving as the director of the Institute on Community Integration from 1997 to 2018. When David interviewed for this job, he conveyed a commitment to ICI as an independent entity, free from the interest of specific academic departments, and committed really to the power of the entrepreneurial impulses of its staff to make the world a better place for people with disabilities and their families. David's years of leadership at ICI always reflected the vision of ICI and how it could best serve people with disabilities and their families through research, training, and education. ICI's growth in size and national regard to a substantial degree is a result of David's early commitment to ICI and his thought about our role at the university. During his tenure as ICI director, he more than doubled our revenue, doubled our staff, and increased the lifespan topical areas in which we conduct research. As our director, he made sure that ICI had great staff. We had great staff that were committed to our mission. He set clear expectations for leaders and let us do our work. He got out of the way. This autonomy and his leadership made ICI what it is today. I know he was very proud of ICI, our programs, our staff, and our accomplishments. He was honored to be our director. And I'm quite certain that David will always be the ICI director with the longest tenure. David has colleagues, as I said, all over the world, and these relationships and partnerships were highly valued by him and by those of us that worked for him. Here are some of the key observations in the messages that I heard from colleagues. David was a humble and quiet man, described by a lot of people as a gentle giant. Despite his broad expertise and national reputation, he rarely felt the need to assert himself. He always carried himself with the strength and professionalism, and in fact, I never saw him ever wear casual clothing to work, and I am certain that the first time I ever saw him in jeans was when we were traveling together in Italy a year ago. At his core, he treated others with respect, had pride in his work and the work of his colleagues, and always focused on the greater good. David was extremely generous with his time and was there for people when they needed him. He was a problem solver and had a great ear, but when asked, he'd offer sage advice and share his wisdom with you. He really enjoyed seeing others grow and rise in their career and wanted to bring the spotlight onto their work and away from him. Despite his own well-deserved accolades, he often stepped aside and let others lead and grow. And we all learned from David that tooting your horn was not something you should do because it likely wouldn't get you where you wanted to go in your career. David's stoic style and dry humor weren't always easy to read, but for those of us who did get it, we saw him as an extremely funny man. He often inserted funny and dry observations at a meeting or event just at that right time, and he always got a joke even when nobody made a joke. I laughed out loud when I was cleaning his office a couple of weeks ago because I ran across a blue folder labeled cartoons. And inside of it were photocopied cartoons from the Chronicles of Higher Education and Gary Larson. And he often used those when he would do presentations, and each had a direct connection to something about his work. One of his colleagues, who was born and raised in Minnesota and was one of his students, shared this thought: if Lake Wobegon were a real place, David could have been their mayor. And as a transplant to this state, I wouldn't have understood that statement a few decades ago, but I get it now, and I think it's just perfect. Despite his incredible achievements, David was always deeply grounded in love for his family. His joy in spending time on his farm, caring for his horses and dogs and whatever other animals they had acquired, or sharing stories about his grandchildren was a testament to his warmth and his humility. Nothing made David smile more than his family. He loved to share his phone screen with you. He just sort of put it over on the days that he changed his screensaver and there was a new picture of one of his grandchildren or a new pet. While he never bragged about himself, he often bragged about his family. You, Sharon, and your horse experiences and your career, Travis and Andrew, your career paths. I know for sure that after all of the years of his work, thank you so much for sharing David with us. I know too well the responsibilities of what his job was, and I know how much time being away from you it required. So thank you. David was kind, he was funny, he was a hard worker, as you've heard, and he was also a lifelong learner, but moreover, he was a researcher with an advocate's heart. His character exemplified integrity, empathy, an unwavering dedication to helping others, and I'm confident that his example continues to inspire those of you who knew him each and every day. David's passing is a deep loss to all who knew him and the countless lives he touched through his pioneering work and compassionate spirit. It caught many of us totally off guard as he was far too young and he had so many more things he wanted to do. I feel so honored to have been able to spend time with him in those last few weeks of his life. He was a realist, kind of like me, and he knew he was dying soon. When he finally called to tell me he was ill, he was very matter-of-fact about it. And I'll never forget what he said. Amy, David here. Here's the deal. It's cancer. It's terminal. I have less than 2 months. At his bedside, he talked about his students because he wanted to ensure their path forward in completing their degrees. He talked about his current and newly funded grants as he wanted to make sure that the principal investigator changes were made. He also talked about his accounts, and he really wanted to make sure that those stayed at ICI. But I was very fortunate. I got to tell him how much I learned from him, what I appreciated most about him, and that I was saddened that he never got to retire. But mostly we talked about our spouses and how much we loved them and appreciated their support. We talked about our boys. I too have 2 sons who have grown into men, the grandchildren he loves so much, and my hope that I'd live long enough for my children to have children. We also shared our favorite fishing stories and tips, and I promised him that we'd all carry forward the things that were most important to him. I was at our cabin this last weekend out in my fishing kayak, and of course I will forever think of David when I'm fishing. I was able to tell him that it was a really shitty fishing day yesterday, and I didn't get one bite, but I also was able to lament and remember on how we used to talk about a bad day fishing was always a good day because we were fishing. I know I was incredibly lucky to have those moments with him, and I am forever grateful. So what I would say to you is carry forward and honor David's memory by living and celebrating all you have learned from him. Thank you. And as I mentioned, we have a great staff at ICI who are highly talented, and Jerry Smith and his team put together a short video to share with you about David and his life, so I would ask for that to be played, and then following that, we'll have an open mic for people to be able to share their thoughts and memories about David.
David actually, after he graduated with his baccalaureate degree, went into the Peace Corps. And he was in the Dominican Republic. He was there to help found and develop school services for students with developmental disabilities. He had this sense that he really wanted to make a difference in the world. David had taken a master's degree at Mankato State University in rehab counseling and was finishing his PhD in ed policy and administration.
I transferred to St. Cloud State from UMD. I knew I wanted to be a special ed teacher, and David Johnson was the first professor at St. Cloud State that I met. He had this sense of making me believe that I was capable and that I could set my sights higher than I maybe had set them for myself.
He was an assistant professor. He enjoyed teaching. He enjoyed students. He had a great job. He was on his way to tenure. And I offered him a half-time position with the prospect that we would hustle like crazy and seek grants and contracts and make it a full-time position. And I said, at the end of 6 months, if we don't come up with some money, you might not have a job. He took a chance on us, and did we benefit from his commitment?
I first met David in the early 80s. I thought of him as older than me, even though he wasn't, because he seemed so mature and so knowledgeable all the time.
While he was director for 20 years, he did lots of other things as well.
Faculty and all of the duties there as a full professor, and administrative roles within that in terms of coordinating the program, et cetera. Director of ICI and Associate Dean for Research. That's a skillful bit of juggling.
David is the kind of academic that always worried me, because as a junior faculty member and I see these academic scholars do all these multiple roles, I always wondered, wow, I don't know how he does it. I don't think I'll ever get there.
David was Associate Dean for Research when I was the Dean of the College of Education and Human Development, and I think I can say very easily that I couldn't have done it without David. He's brilliant. He's a great administrator. He's a good thinker. He was very patient. He was very forward-thinking.
Has his fingerprints over some very exciting entrepreneurial activities that took place in the college.
He really was behind taking a known intervention for dropout prevention and took it to another level where it was self-sustaining and you didn't have to have grant funding to keep it moving forward.
He not only did his work, taught his students, advised his students, large numbers I might add, but he also made this commitment to the university writ large.
There were times when he would tell me what he was doing and all the different things he was in, and I would say to him, David, I'm exhausted listening.
I would call David one of the nation's leading experts in transition of youth and young adults from high school into employment, high school into post-secondary education, and high school into community life.
David's work in transition made big differences in how transition was viewed by policymakers and how it was viewed as important.
I think from a professional standpoint, David had a massive impact on workforce development for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. I mean, he really did.
He was happiest when he was writing grants, landing grants, getting a grant awarded was a huge, huge thing for him.
I remember staying there from 8 a.m. to midnight, resulting in my car having a squirrel build a nest in the car. I hardly made it home. David was out there trying to help me get the car going. He was always so kind.
He worked so hard and put in so many hours, but it excited him. And, and he'd look at it, something that needed to happen. He'd say, well, I'm going to look for a grant for that. And then, 6 months later, I'd look and he'd go, oh, yeah, I got that grant and it's for $3 million. And then I passed that on to these other people, or I created a team.
It was with David's help and Mary McAvoy's help working together to bring the National Center on Educational Outcomes into ICI, where I think it really blossomed.
When I became dean, I was able to reach out to David and have a few conversations with him. And I really appreciated his sage advice and just sort of calm demeanor and institutional wisdom.
He was always positioned as a critical friend, where if things were going well, he would tell you. And if things needed to change or there were concerns, he would tell you that too.
I really appreciated that I worked with him for a number of years before pursuing a PhD where he was my advisor. As an advisor, he understood that I am a full-time employee, full-time student. I'm a mom, and understanding how to kind of guide me to fit my PhD work in with all of those things that I have going on.
Students would come to him with, stress, worries, trying to figure out, how do I do this dissertation? How do I make this thing work? And he would sit them down and he would say, okay, well, let's figure this thing out. Let's figure out a plan to do this in a very practical way that's not going to break your back, that's not going to make you stay here for the next 8 years.
He had probably more advisees than most of the faculty in OLPD.
In addition to him being able to do everything, he also knew what he couldn't do. It wasn't until when I was sending the final draft 2 weeks and 2 days before my defense that he shared with me that he had to step down from being my advisor because he was going into hospice.
He mentored and advised so many students. I think we counted 350. He was a professor. He was well respected in his field. He did so much for this university. But ultimately, what shows up is him as a human being and always treating everyone else with that same sense of care.
One of the things I saw in David was the same thing that I saw in many of the early founders of ICI. And that was this sort of entrepreneurial spirit, this value-based commitment to really make a difference in the world.
David was so good at communicating what the issues were.
Dave's ability to summarize a situation, to be able to, in a succinct, few words, be able to pinpoint what the issue is and what we're going to do about it was second to none.
One of the things that I thought was most noteworthy about David was his steadiness. He was solid in his belief on what I think the ICI Center was about. Others that worked with David always saw him as a person you could count on, as a person who was going to contribute.
David's ability to help me see the world in a bigger way than maybe I had thought about seeing it was transformational to me. And I worked with him for a number of years.
He was focused and he knew what the priority was.
He was creative in how he thought about ICI and where our money would come from.
This is a guy that you learn the passion of which he hates to leave money on the table, right? And so just that orientation of how do we get ourselves positioned strategically to not leave the money on the table, because that resource gives us the ability to do more.
He knew that we really shouldn't be fully federally funded. That wasn't a good idea. So early on, David was pretty open to working with states and taking on contracts that might look very different than a grant.
Dave is able to show, when we think about the mission of the College in Human Development, that this value proposition of the research unit like ICI is both financially a good bet and mission a good bet.
He was part of really great networks. And if he didn't have the answer or know the solution, he knew who to bring to the table to figure it out.
What I loved about him is that it was never about David. It was always about the work. I just think that that's so rare.
There's a lot of drama that occurs in higher education. A lot of egos. A lot of people want to have their stories told, and that is the way it should be. David was never that person. He would never overreact.
Like a lot of people who are so driven, it's easy to let the work take over itself. But what he never forgot was there's a human attached to the work.
He really lived by, we shouldn't be doing research just to do research. We should be doing research to change people's lives.
He also valued connections. So connections to the people who worked here. That meant mentoring them and making sure he was there.
If you know David, he could do it all. I mean, he could do everything. I mean, he could just, does he need a co-PI? I'm not sure. Yet he also gave me opportunities and asked me to do things so that I could learn the process. It wasn't so much of like delegating, but it was more like showing that he had the confidence in me.
What he saw as talent, he developed it, and I was grateful that he saw it in me.
He also had this deep commitment to making a contribution that extended beyond himself. And it's the notion of paying it forward to the future.
Our daughter was actually in special education. Steph graduated successfully in the transition program in Minneapolis. Later in her career, she applied for a job at ICI. She knew David Johnson. They developed a very lovely relationship.
She would refer to David as the big kahuna. She would say, well, when the big kahuna comes back from D.C., we're going to see if this happens or that happens.
You could always tell how proud David was of this place and the people that worked here. And he was always willing to give credit where credit was due. I always appreciated that. Not everybody does that.
David had a good team surrounding him, everybody from administrative support to financial support to HR support.
He had no desire to micromanage. He had a desire to know you and to make sure that you were on a career path that would take you to the next level. If I had to say one word that described just his presence, I would say stoic.
The word I would use to describe him is unflappable. He carried a lot of weight for a lot of people.
David was very humble and unassuming, but somehow I think that may have been a trick. As soon as you heard him speak, you knew that he had done his homework.
He took his work seriously. He took his commitment seriously. He took his commitment to his family seriously, his office seriously, his colleagues seriously. He wanted to make a difference in the world, but he was also a lighthearted person who could see humor around him and share it with others.
He is probably one of the funniest people I have ever worked with. And what makes him funny is the juxtaposition of what you think he is and who he really is.
Man, he had such a great sense of humor, and it was dry. It was a very dry sense of humor.
And you had to be kind of smart to get it.
He would be the funniest when he wasn't cracking a smile. And you'd go, is he joking or is he serious?
And, you know, he graduated from high school with Jesse Ventura.
When his office was down in the lower level, the garden level of Patty Hall, and he had a particularly large mountain of paperwork on his desk one afternoon. And I commented on it that, you know, wow, it's going to take him a while to wade through all of those papers or something like that. And he said, just wait till you see it tomorrow. And I showed up for a meeting the next morning and his desk was completely clean. And I said, did you stay up all night, David, cleaning your desk? And he said, no, I just picked up one end of it and let everything slide off the other end into the garbage and it's gone. If I didn't need it, you know, for the last 2 weeks, I don't need it now. I still don't know if he was serious about that or what he did with all those papers.
We had a lot of good conversations outside of work or non-work topics like fishing, camping, outdoors. He often shared stories of fishing with Bob up in Canada.
We fished together for over 15 years. We opened the Canadian fishing season for at least 15 years, I think pretty close to 20. We had pictures taken of catching some pretty big fish. I got home, back to my office, and I get this picture from David with him proudly holding this giant fish. It was a big walleye, I believe. And me next to him holding a fish that was about 6 inches long. He had one of the colleagues in ICI shrink my fish, so it looked like a small minnow compared to his. So that's kind of his sense of humor. Another part of the story, you might say, well, how did David become David,
I grew up with a brother with a significant developmental disability. He lived in the family home with us. He taught me many things.
When he would talk about his family and about his brother in particular, you really saw the love and the emotion and the passion that he brought to his work when he talked about his brother. It was really clear to me that what was most important to David was his family, without question.
We both had 2 sons. It was David who advised me to immediately go out and get AAA for both of my sons when they became drivers because you would need it, and I did. And I went over he said there'll be a maximum number of times you can use it, and he was right, and we went over it. And then, of course, his love for his wife, for Sharon, and the horses and the dogs and the farm, and he loved talking about that.
If you had animals, I think you could always strike up a conversation. Yeah, I think he'd much rather talk about animals than work.
We both agreed that the most fun thing in life was to become a grandparent. I know that was just a great source of pride for him, and he would just break into this great smile whenever he would tell a story about his grandchildren.
It's that personal side of him that he was so quiet and reserved about, but when he would open up about it, you could really connect to his heart.
This is a person that kept his eye on the ball, did hard work, achieved, I think, monumental things. But his values were such that he took care of all the other people around him as well.
Even when he first called me and I said to him, he was basically, telling me that it's terminal, and I was trying to have a conversation with him, trying to make it about him. And he's like, Eileen, I have full, you've got this. I have full confidence. And he kept turning it back to my defense and and wanted to just talk about and didn't want me to have to worry about not being able to go through with that.
He was just a steady force that who influenced people, and sometimes I don't think he even knew he did, and even if he did, he wouldn't mention it. And that's a great model for all leaders, I think.
I'm really sad that he won't be here to be with me as I finish my PhD journey.
I know I'm a better engaged scholar and a better academic leader because of David.
I join in remembering him, in celebrating him, and how lucky we were to have known David.
He was a good guy. I'm going to miss him terribly.
He will really be missed. He is missed already.
I do miss him a lot. So it's one of those things you think about and you say to yourself, man, those are relationships that don't come along very often.
I don't know how my life led me to a place where I got to do work with a David Johnson, but it has allowed me to have a career I never expected and to have a relationship with amazing people. His incredible wife, Sharon. I feel like all the people who didn't get that opportunity, I feel badly for them, and I feel just so blessed.
It's been a wonderful career for me. I could ask for nothing more. Where can you work where you can choose the type of work you really want to do, as well as being able to work with very incredible people who share that same passion with you.
Thanks again to Jerry and Pete and everybody who helped pull that video together. It's time now for open mic. So anybody who would like to share a memory or a comment about David, grab a mic. You want to put, my boss is telling me to do this.
And I'm also available to come to you if that is your preference.
Hi, I feel the need to identify myself because many of you won't know me. Frank Simons, I'm a professor here in the special education program, Department of Ed Psych, and also serving as the Senior Associate Dean for Research and Policy. I'm the guy that followed David. And, you know, how do you follow David? The short answer is you don't. So I just thought, I've got something I want to read from some folks that couldn't make it here today, but I thought I'll just add a couple of comments a little bit and tie Ryan into this. So, you know, I didn't get to work with David in an administrative role. I didn't run any grants through ICI, but we walked in many of the same circles. A lot of my work is very focused on intellectual and developmental disabilities. And so David, for me, when I got here in the summer of 2000, has just been somebody that he had an open door. I could walk in and chat with him about issues in the field that were concerning to him and to me. Fast forward to summer of 2014, and this is, you know, old timey stuff, of desk phone and a phone ringing that you would actually pick up and answer. As Dave, he's like, Frank, you got a moment? Yeah. Hey, you interested in being the Associate Dean for Research? I said, are you kidding me? He goes, no, come on, you know, I've been 7 years, I got other things I want to be doing. So, you know, long story short, I went over, I had a meeting with Dean Quam, who I didn't know very well, and we sat down. What I didn't realize at the time was this is like some kind of orchestrated effort between Dave as a fisherman to land me maybe, or at least get him on the hook, and then I got Ryan come in as the closer of a used car salesman of what's it going to take for us to get you in this chair today in this office. And then I meet with Dean Quam, and we're talking, and I believe very early on in the conversation, I confessed that, look, you know, I don't know anything about administration. I don't have the clothes for it. I mean, look at this guy, that blue suit alone. I said, I can't follow David. Long story short, I haven't followed him. I've eclipsed his time in the role. And I'm happy to say, actually, Ryan, it only took me 10 years, I didn't do it, the college is back to where David left it in terms of total sponsored expenditures. So by God, the Johnson effect. So what I want to do, though, is a group of folks emailed me because they couldn't make it, and this is from the university's Disability Issues Committee, that they are very sad to say they're unable to make David's memorial tomorrow. They have obligations that relate to David. So I'm going to skip around. There's some personal information in this email, but this person is saying, I'm really sad I can't attend David's memorial tomorrow. I have a prior commitment with the university senate. He was such an important presence to our effort, the Disability Issues Committee, to the recovery coordinator resolution and a position at the university level for a recovery coordinator from substance abuse. Frankly, David was instrumental. The resolution came about through personal issues with regard to some members of the committee, and David once he learned that there was sort of a block in the central administration with regard to the possibility of creating a peer recovery specialist position at the university, set David about and put him in motion. And so, long story short, David felt it would be useful to push for a full-time dedicated position to advocate for a recovery community at the university. Hence the resolution. You know the rest. I'm not sure what will happen now that it has passed through the university senate, but I do know that nothing would have gotten off the ground if not for David. And I think that says it all, and we saw that through line. Nothing would have gotten off the ground if not for David. So thank you, and that's on behalf of the Disability Issues Committee.